I call Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak to these two bills that were previously made up the Marine Legislation Bill. Labor wants to make it clear that while we support the Maritime Transport Amendment Bill, which has come from what was originally Part 1 of the Marine Legislation Bill, we are opposed to the Exclusive Economic Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Bill, which falls out of Part 2 of the original bill. My colleague Moana Maki has gone into considerable detail about why Labor is opposing the Exclusive Economic Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Bill. So I aim to discuss some of the matters involved in the Maritime Transport Amendment Bill. The purpose of the Maritime Transport Amendment Bill is essentially to implement a number of international treaties that really the government has taken an awfully long time to sign up to. And this goes all the way back, sir, to 2008, prior to the 2008 election. The Transport and Industrial Relations Select Committee, during that term of Parliament, recommended to the government that it implement the various conventions that this bill implements. And the Select Committee took its time to consider the implications of the International Convention on Civil Liability for Bunker Oil Pollution Damage, the changes to the Convention on the Limitation of Liability for Maritime Claims. And so all the hard work had really been done by that Select Committee. It made its proposals to government, and the then Labor government was ready to accept those proposals and implement them in legislation. We then had an election, the government changed, and it fell to the National Party to carry on the work that had already been carried out. Sadly, the National Party failed to implement the recommendations of the Select Committee and sat on this legislation for not quite 5 long years, but sat on it for long enough. Long enough, in fact, of course, for the Rena disaster to occur before this legislation is implemented. And had the government been up to the task, had the government been onto it, had it been prepared to prioritise safety of our waters around our shoreline, and had they been prepared simply, it required nothing more than to follow up on work previously done, then New Zealand and the New Zealand government, New Zealand taxpayers, would not have been liable for the millions of dollars in costs associated with the Rena disaster. In fact, the costs to the Crown, sir, were over $50 million. $50 million. Now, had this legislation been implemented before the Rena disaster, then the Crown would have been liable to pay around about $11.3 million. It's still a significant sum, but it is considerably less than the $50 million that it has cost us. And that cost was absolutely avoidable. It was nothing more than negligence and, frankly, laziness on the part of the government that meant that, that this legislation was not implemented in time. After months of negotiation, the Crown was actually able to get a reduction in those costs. It did end up being less than $50 million. But again, the real cost that the government should have borne was significantly less. So it's good news that this legislation is being passed. It's a bit behind the time. But we know that in the future, should another disaster like the Rena occur, and of course we hope that it won't, and we hope the government has actually taken the steps to help ensure that a disaster like the Rena isn't able to occur again, or is less likely to occur again. But should it, then taxpayers will not have to carry the burden. It will fall where it ought to, which is with the shipping company that owned the vessel. A foreign company. Once again, you know, it's not unusual for this government to be doing things which take the burden of cost off large foreign multinationals and place it on the New Zealand taxpayer. I'm not for a second saying that they did it deliberately this time. There are plenty of other examples where they did do it deliberately. but it wasn't deliberate this time. It was just basically laziness and negligence on behalf of the government. But this bill actually does something else which is incredibly positive. It sets the blood alcohol limit for seafarers in charge of a marine-going vessel at 0.05. Now, why does it do that? Well, again, this is about signing up to international conventions. This is about following international best practice. And I want to congratulate the government on promoting legislation that sets a blood alcohol limit of 0.05, because we know that that is the medical definition of intoxication. Once somebody has a blood alcohol level of 0.05 or higher, they're not capable of good decision making, they're not capable of operating a marine-going vessel, nor are they capable of operating any form of machinery, and they're not capable of operating a vehicle on the road. And it would be an excellent thing for New Zealand to adopt a 0.05 limit, not just for seafarers but also for drivers on the road, because we know that drink driving is one of the key causes of serious road crashes in New Zealand.
Order.
And the evidence is incredibly strong. It doesn't matter what piece of evidence you look at, the evidence supports what this bill does, which is to reduce the alcohol limit for seafarers from 0.08 down to 0.05. If we look at what the number of incidents that this bill, that making this change will impact, it's around about 20 incidents a year, and so it's helpful, but it pales in comparison to the impact that we could have if we applied the 0.05 limit included in this bill across a range of other activities, including drink driving. Around a couple of hundred people die on the road every year.
Order.
And that itself is evidence, that is strong evidence why we should support the 0.05 limit in this bill, sir. A limit of 0.08 for adults allows seafarers, drivers, or anybody else for that matter, to have around about 6 standard drinks in an hour. And in fact, I saw a report just last night, sir, where someone consumed 8 beers in around about an hour and a half, and they were still below the level of 0.08. Now, I think we would all agree that nobody should be in charge of a marine vessel when they have consumed 8 beers. And that's why we are so much in support of this initiative to reduce the limits. The other thing for seafarers, if they're, because I know that seafarers, they have downtime on the ship. There's not necessarily a lot to do. Heading to the bar is one of the favoured activities. If they're aiming, because they know they're coming on to watch shortly, if they're aiming to get to about 0.79 and come in just under the limit, once they get over 0.05, they will find it very difficult to judge exactly how intoxicated they are. And often seafarers, like drivers, will find that they're actually well over the limit because they've lost their ability to judge how intoxicated they are. Lowering the limit for seafarers will ensure that we don't only don't only eliminate those seafarers who are between 0.05 and 0.08, but that we also ensure that we reduce the number of seafarers who are extremely intoxicated when they are in charge of a marine vessel, sir. So we congratulate the government on this side of the House for promoting legislation that does that. We believe that 0.05 is the correct limit for anybody who is operating a vehicle or machinery that has the potential to cause harm to themselves or to other people should their intoxication end up causing an incident of any kind. So, sir, With that, I just want to reiterate that Labor is in support of the changes to the marine transport legislation, but we will oppose the changes to the EEZ legislation.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Nā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. I rise to support the two bills